Today we're going to talk about the legendary tier Italian cruiser Venezia. But before we begin, a little note on yesterday's video regarding the review of the Lucian. I noticed that William Sims, as an inspiration, increases the amount of HP restored by the repair party. That, as several commenters pointed out to me, is because the repair party restores HP according to a certain percentage of the ship's total HP. So therefore, if you increase the total HP, it increases the amount of HP restored by the repair party consumable, but it's still the same percentage. So thank you guys for letting me know that. I had not actually considered that, but it makes perfect sense. And this just goes to show you even somebody like me who has played this game for nearly 5 years doesn't know everything there is to know. And anybody who claims to know everything there is to know about World of Warships Legends, well, I recommend listening to them with at least one skeptical ear. Anyway, we're going to run down the stats for Venezia. I've got a couple clips to help illustrate my points here, and then I've got more of a full game. What I'm really concerned about is the guns, primarily, and the shell types, namely SAP. But before we get there, 51,800 HP is what the Venezia has. I'd say that's pretty good, and likewise, the armor profile is pretty good. We've even got a 40mm icebreaker along the waterline of the bow, although the bow and stern plating are both 25mm, so they are certainly overmatchable. And then the side armor has 30mm plating. There's a very exposed citadel that wouldn't be too terribly difficult to hit, but something with 16-inch guns, like the Montana, for example, well, that's just going to bounce all of its shells off the Venezia's angled side armor. You have to be careful, though, because there is a lot of overmatch in the form of, for example, USS Ohio, Yamato, Musashi, Republique. All of those can overmatch 30mm plating. But the guns here, that's what we really want to examine. And let's just ask this Shimakaze how he feels about Venezia's sap. Yeah, there we go. That is First Blood Medal and a Dev Strike. I think a legit Dev Strike as well. That might have been the result of the bug. I'm not 100% sure, but I think we did take away enough HP for the Dev Strike there. Certainly I have a clip a little later, or maybe coming up next, that will show you a more legit Dev Strike. And there, 10k against a Broadside Ohio. But on to this clip. Against another destroyer. There's a daring inside of this smoke screen. We spotted him on our approach. We turned far to the right in order to make it so that if he does launch torpedoes, hopefully they're going to miss. The Venezia has 15 guns, set in 5 triple turrets. These are 203mm guns, or 8-inch guns. The maximum damage done by the SAP is 5,200, and that is absolutely devastating to destroyers because the SAP is always going to get full penetrations, and you can reliably dev strike them. Now, of course, one downside to the Venezia is the maneuverability, as you are going to see in this clip. With my commander build, I've got a 12.2 second rudder shift time. We do have a 760-meter turning circle, so it's not the most agile thing in the world, and if you get into close range knife fights with destroyers like that, well, you can easily go down, as we did here in this clip. But still, the guns are quite effective. In any case, we've said the maximum SAP shell damage 5,200. Maximum AP shell damage you might find perhaps a little low sounding for the size of the guns, 4,800, but keep in mind there are 15 of them. The range on this build is 17.4 kilometers, but I am using Francesco Mimbelli. Now, in this particular battle, I think I was using Sansonetti. I've tested out Mimbelli, Sansonetti, and Azerlane Zara. Personally, I'd be taking Azerlane Zara all the time, but I realize that not everybody has her, so I've settled on Mimbelli as sort of my recommended commander build, mostly because the turret traverse on these guns is pretty bad. I've got it down to 23.8 seconds with Mimbelli, but it can be up to 30 seconds if you don't have any commander skills buffing it. And so when I was using Sansonetti, I was actually using the Turret Traverse mod rather than Aiming Systems mod 1 to compensate for that. And that build worked perfectly fine. I just would prefer to use Aiming Systems mod 1 and have my commander build take care of the Turret Traverse in the form of Ingenious on Mimbelli. And of course, we have some inspirations to account for relative lack of range. The Venezia's range is only 16.5 kilometers on the main battery. I've got it up to 17.4 with Mimbelli. And then finally, the other main pain point for these guns is that the base reload with the SAP is 21 seconds, which is kind of outrageous. I think it's a little ridiculous, and they could buff it a little bit. But with Mimbelli at the helm, we've got an 18-second reload. That's still quite long, but I found it to be serviceable. The thing also does have torpedoes. Weirdly enough, though, it has fewer torpedoes than the Brindisi at Tier 8. There are 2 sets of 3 torpedoes, one on each side. They do have a 13.5 kilometer range, but they go at 56 knots, so they're not exceptionally fast. They've got a sea detectability of 1.1 km, and they do 13,900 damage. They reload fairly quickly, too, just over a minute at 71 seconds. The AA, I don't think, is anything to write home about. Maneuverability, we've sort of already discussed. Slow rudder shift, 760-meter turning circle. With this build, though, on Mimbelli, and with the Epic Booster Battle Propensity flag, we do enjoy a very good top speed of 39.6 knots, and our concealment is excellent at 10 km with the concealment mod, and of course with Mikawa as one inspiration. As for the consumables, we have the classic Italian smoke screen, the rolling smoke. The dispersion time I've got on my build is 38 seconds. We've got fighter planes, and then we've got a standard sort of cruiser heel. So what is the Venezia about? Well, the reason I wanted to show you sort of the full sequence of this game is because you'll note that the enemy team really didn't have much of a presence on the Alpha Cap, and so we were able to sail into it and take it. And for whatever reason, the enemy team has decided to go between Bravo and Charlie on this map, more or less bow in. Almost all of them are doing this, and therefore they're giving broadside to this section of the map, which is going to give us an opportunity to really test out the efficacy of Venezia's SAP against all kinds of targets. And here's the thing about Venezia with SAP. I think cruisers in this game are a pretty varied class, right? We have everything from giga destroyers like Atlanta to battleships like Stalingrad. And when most people think of cruisers, I think what they think of is DPM, specifically HE DPM, that you're shooting at battleships or other cruisers in order to deal a tremendous amount of damage over time and probably dissuade them from pushing into some part of the map. That's sort of the role that you might think of the light or even heavy cruiser performing as sort of a damage-dealing spammer, right? Well, there are other cruisers where it's all about the Alpha Strike, and that's the story on Venezia. This thing is all about the Alpha Strike, whether it's the AP or the SAP. Most of the time, I think you want to be shooting the SAP, because you can see just how effective it can be even against angled targets. We're getting massive hits on some of these ships out here. Now, of course, SAP is only going to penetrate a set amount of armor. I don't know exactly what Venezia's threshold is. I haven't looked that up, but it can penetrate a good amount of armor. And it's only going to penetrate the armor that it can penetrate, for lack of a better way to phrase it. If it hits an armor surface too thick, it's simply going to shatter. But of course, it is going to pen at much steeper angles than AP is, and the Alpha Strike on it is actually higher than the AP. Plus, when it does pen, it's always going to full pen. It's never going to over pen. And so it is a very consistent source of damage, so long as you aim it at the correct parts of the ship. Now, there are times when you would want to switch and use AP. Those would be if you've got a broadside cruiser and you can hit the Citadel. AP is going to be better than SAP in that case, but most of the rest of the time, you just want to be shooting SAP and farming damage with big Alpha Strikes off the softer armored parts of every ship. Basically, light cruisers, you can pen them everywhere. Heavy cruisers, probably the upper belt armor and superstructure. Battleships, pretty much the same thing. American battleships, British, and French, the sap is devastating against those. Against Russian, German, and Italian, it can be a little less impressive, and you really do have to dial it into the superstructure. It really requires a precise aim and a working knowledge, a general working knowledge of armor schemes in this game in order to get the most out of sap. So it's probably not going to be necessarily the easiest shell type for everybody to get along with, let's just say. But it is quite effective, and I think the ship is very good. The smoke screen also allows it to have mobile concealment, essentially, and deploy anywhere on the map. If things get too hot, Venezia can go dark, and it can still maintain fire on targets. The smoke firing penalty, by the way, is somewhat ridiculous. We've got a 6.3 kilometer detectability while firing inside of smoke, so we can be quite close to enemy ships and still fire and still do damage. The ship, I think, is excellent. It's also very tanky and practically unkillable if, for example, you're kiting down a flank away from a battleship that cannot overmatch you, like, say, a Montana or Borgonia or Colombo even. You angle against them with your 30 millimeter side armor. You shoot sap at them as you kite. You're a very difficult target to deal with, very tanky, and very annoying with the sap getting these big hits on the superstructure and whatnot. Now, of course, eventually the sap damage is going to fall off if you continue to shoot at the same target over and over. I think we've seen a good deal of that in this particular battle here, where I've been able to take a lot of sap salvos at a lot of various different cruisers and battleships, and you can see when they hit, like a full health ship, provided that they don't mostly miss like we did there against the Colbert. But when they hit a full health unsaturated ship, the damage can be absolutely filthy and monstrous. Once the saturation starts to set in, we do get diminishing returns, so that is something to keep in mind and a bit of a downside. But sap is a very consistent shell, and in a shot like that, when we have low health ships that we need to finish off, we can rest in confidence that we are going to finish off those ships. Whereas perhaps if we had shot AP, for example, maybe we would only get over pens or something like that. With sap, at the very least, we're always guaranteed full pens. The real danger, of course, from this sap is to destroyers. As we've seen, this sap can absolutely dev strike them. You do not want to mess around with the Venezia if you are playing a destroyer or even a lightly armored cruiser. The sap can likewise be devastating. But on the same token, Venezia really has no utility. We do have smokescreen and fighter plane consumable and heal, but we don't have sonar or radar, so we are to a large degree reliant on spotting from our teammates, especially against destroyers, in order to make the most out of our sap. So, of course, you can play the thing solo. I spend 99% of my time in this game playing solo, but it probably would be helpful if you had a friendly DD who could spot for you the enemy destroyers. You do that, you got one of those, and you pick them up. You don't have to worry about torpedoes because you got your teammate scouting those for you. Well, this thing could be monstrous. And I would certainly not call it overpowered or anything. I think there are times when you're really going to struggle to deal any damage with the sap. If you've got a lot of Italian and German battleships, for example, and they're angled against you, the damage is going to fall off really badly. But I think it is a very good and effective ship. I intend to do far more videos on it in the future, if I can, before it leaves my port. But I certainly think it's worth pursuing as a Bureau project. It's definitely the highlight of the Italian heavy cruiser line, which is what you would expect. And I'm glad to see they brought it into Legends. This was the first ship I grinded on PC to tier 10. And really, this is a pretty faithful translation of that ship, I would say. So I'm enjoying it quite a bit. Hope you enjoyed this video. If so, give it a thumbs up. Consider subscribing if you haven't already. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.